Thank you. Thank you very much.
And suddenly a silence fell across the room as they all realised it was about to start. You go.
Yeah, thank you very much for your very informative talk. My name's Kieran Howard from the Politics and the Pub Management Committee. Okay, what do you think of the view expressed by the historian Mark McKenna in his book The Captive Republic, A History of Republicanism in Australia, that a minimalist republicanism, separated from the struggle for social justice and social reform, a Bill of Rights, a treaty with the First Peoples, an elected president perhaps, is possibly irrelevant or doomed to failure by failing to galvanise a movement, which has happened in the past, and at worst, a reactionary attempt to divert people's attention away from injustice and oppression towards jingoistic flag-waving nationalism. And McKenna quotes an earlier Red Republican, William Lane, from the 19th century. For Lane, a republic was nothing without nationalisation of the nation's resources, women's rights, electoral reform, and free education. Your opinion.
To which I would, thank you. That is a very terrific question. That's a really wonderful question. I'll just repeat it for those who didn't hear it. He said, "I love your books. Where can I buy your books?" No, that's a really interesting question. And Mark McKenna has been good to me over the years. He sort of helped inform me a lot about the history of that. But I am a believer in the politics of the possible. And I believe that we can get our fellow Australians to move 6 inches. I don't believe we can get them to move 6 feet. And I, for one, would love reconciliation/treaty. I would love us to sort out recognition, treaty, the whole thing. A lot of people say we're not going, and when I took over, reconciliation was, we had same-sex marriage, reconciliation, then the Republic. And wonderfully, we've got same-sex marriage, and I would love to report that reconciliation is just around the corner, or treaty or recognition. I think it fair to say, and I have to choose my words carefully, but I think it fair to say, and I'll be interested if you agree, does that now look a lot further off than we had hoped a year ago? Yes. Do you agree with that? Okay, so for me, I'm not prepared to say that we need all of those things that Mark McKellar went through, because again, when I explain what I want to the audiences, to most audiences around Australia, they say, well, why wasn't that put to us in 1999, that it was such a minimal change? I would have voted for it. And I'll say, well, it was put to us in 1999, but it came with a slide rule and a packed lunch and 10 constitutional lawyers arguing about the phraseology, and it wasn't put simply. And I think, for me, the problem we've got, I mean, somebody said that the Republic is a solution in search of a problem. And for me, the primary problem with the constitutional monarchy is just the out-and-out humiliation of not running our own show. You know, that we currently have government of the people, of Australians, by Australians, for Australians, overseen by an English person. And that is a humiliation for the country. So for me, the primary reason to do it is for our pride, our honour and our dignity. The primary problem with getting it done is a lot of people say, well, the system works fine right now. So all of those things that you're talking about, the Bill of Rights, etc., they're all big changes. And in the real world, on Talkback 2GB, on, you know, there is a culture in this country, let's talk about Talkbackia, for want of a better term. They would die 1,000 deaths if you say, here is the Republic, but what you're going to get with the Republic is all these other things. I actually think for the art of the political possible, it needs to be a narrow target to say this is the simple one thing we're doing, and from that moment forth we will be independent, at which point you will likely get all the people, well, you get so many of the people who are happy with the current system. I'm broadly happy with the current system, bar that one thing on top. However, as I say, if our fellow Australians, in their wisdom, decide on direct election, I think that, you know, we should go with that too. There is a hybrid model. I spoke last night at the launch of a book by Benjamin T. Jones on the history of the Australian Republic, and in that he floats a hybrid model, and it's an interesting idea. The essence of it is that each state puts forward its own candidate, and then you put the 6 candidates. I don't know what we do with the ACT and Darwin. We just say, look, if you're from the ACT or Northern Territory, you're not a chance. Probably all states and territories put up their own candidate. I'll have to see what happens with the territories, but people are then not a compulsory vote. It'd be like the same-sex marriage. So it would be, as I understand, the hybrid model that he's put forward. It would be one where if you became president, you actually couldn't claim a mandate of the people. We would understand that it's fundamentally a symbolic role. But I think maybe the hybrid model. But I hope that goes some way towards answering your question. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Joffrey Balchi. I'm with the convening committee of the Politics in the Pub and the secretary of the Association for Good Government. I've got 2 questions, but they're somewhat related. First is, considering that Australia is Aboriginal land and sovereignty was never ceded,
Yes.
don't you think essential to making Australia as a republic is to get them to get the Aboriginals or the First Peoples not just involved, but being at the forefront of this campaign? My second question refers to my being an immigrant and an experienced revolutionary in the Philippines. If I fight for republicanism, I can anticipate people telling me, hey, you came to Australia, you know what you're getting yourself into. If you don't like a constitutional monarchy, go back to where you came from. What do I tell them? Do I tell them to go back to Mother England as well? Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of Indigenous involvement, we would love greater Indigenous involvement. I've talked to my dear friend Stan Grant, who I never credited Stan for his power of oratory. I think he's one of the him and Noel Pearson, in fact, I would put down as the 2 finest orators in the country. That speech by Noel Pearson at Goff's funeral was absolutely extraordinary. But I would love to get, and I've also approached Noel Pearson, I would love to get stronger Indigenous involvement in that. I'm hoping that we will move forward on that this year. In terms of people saying that to you if you don't like it, etc., that's more your problem, not mine. But I would say, but what I would say on that, that stuff is I have signed on to be an Australian citizen. I'm proud to be an Australian citizen, and I'm proud to be an engaged Australian citizen. And if I'd come here in 1966, you wouldn't expect me to sign on for the system that there was in 1966, that there was no Indigenous right to vote. Like that you want to change. I mean, people that signed on just before the same-sex marriage vote was put. There is nobody. Was anybody saying to just before the same-sex marriage vote, you're a recent immigrant? Did they say to you, you're a recent or you're an immigrant? How dare you try and same-sex marriage? I haven't heard people make the argument that new arrivals. Although my brother said to me, my brother who was a partner at Clayton Utz for a long time, he told me a story. One of the personal assistants was a fabulous woman from Bhutan, I think, and she was very intelligent, very switched on, and he thought that she would vote for the Republic in 1999, but she didn't. She said it would be rude to my my host country, as it was, which was surprising, but I think that's a relevant factor. I had a guy the other day speaking. I was speaking somewhere or other at a lunch, and a fellow was an English immigrant, and I said, well, why are you a monarchist? And he said, because I am a Christian, and the Queen was appointed by God to be the Australian. I said, well, mate, I can't help you. I've got no argument against that. There is nowhere to go. There's no bridge between us where we can possibly communicate. Good luck. But anyway, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thanks, mate. Peter, my question's more to do with communication, which is probably a good word for marketing as well. But as the movement currently stands in its current form, I know you said 50% of Aussies are Republicans. My feelings are if it went to vote now, it wouldn't go through just because, there's just the feelings of the nation. But if the movement had a marketing issue, as it stands right now, what would it be and what would you...
A marketing issue, how do you mean?
Well, just a marketing constraint that's stopping a lot of the majorities of Aussies from embracing the idea. And so
Right.
you also touched on that the focus should or could be just narrow focus. So the one win, this is all we want to change, which could be seen as a marketing thing. But beyond that, what other things do you think have to change beyond marketing?
So again, I love your T-shirt. That's come out of a marketing campaign, and we need visibility. Do you wear that a lot, or just worn it to this? Do you wear it? Good. Do people stop you and talk about it or not?
I work in the brewing industry, so it's kind of in a similar sort of vein to that. You know, it's kind of getting behind the brand and getting behind that.
Yeah.
And conversations come about, but it's always pretty light.
Yeah. So the big problem we've got is exemplified by the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, who, of course, is a very strong Republican, but has said in the public domain that doesn't want to move forward till the Queen dies. And we invited Malcolm Turnbull to speak to the Republic movement on the 17th of December 2016. He came to Sydney University, Great Hall, 350 people there. And for the first 5 minutes, I said to my wife, we're going to have to carve his image on the western face of the Blue Mountains. This is the bloke that's going to deliver the Republic. Because it was fire and brimstone and passion. And the next 15 minutes was all of the problems that you Republicans have. I said, what, you? What about we? What about us? We have on our side in 2016 at the time, something that you didn't have in 1999. We've got the Prime Minister on our side. But it didn't go down very well. But Malcolm Turnbull has said that he doesn't want to move till the Queen dies. Now, there's a very simple answer to that. There is two ways we can do this. We can get this done in the next 2 or 3 years at a time when the Queen of England is still young enough to come to Australia, to stand on the steps of the Sydney Opera House, hand over the keys, and instead of we, as a nation, bowing or scraping or curtsying or lying on our back and hoping that she will tickle our tummy, we can rise as one and give her a national, thunderous standing ovation and say, thank you, Your Majesty, for the sterling service you have rendered our nation, and do it respectfully and sincerely. She's done a great job. But she hands us the keys. We put it in the thing, we start it up, we take it for a burn around the block, we say we'll buy it, and then we give her a lift to the airport. And we're done. And we're done. Or there's another way we can do it. We can do it the way that Malcolm says we should do it. And so 7 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we wish her a long life. Let's say 15 years from now. Because I think her mother lived till 106, I think. But imagine the scene at Westminster Abbey as the world gathers to farewell a great English Queen. And there'll be people inside and there'll be crowds outside down Pall Mall. And there at the height of the ceremony, there will be helicopters circling Westminster Abbey, NBC crossing live to the Today Show, all of this NBC stuff. And right in the middle of it, slips out the back. What's that? Can you zoom in there, Hank? Somebody's coming out the back of Westminster Abbey. And who is it? It's Australia. You can tell by the Akubra, the little rolly of the Winnie Blue, out the corner of the mouth, the Akubra. And there is Australia coming out the back at the very moment. Who's arriving? Prince Charles. Been waiting for this moment for 80 years. And Australia looks at Prince Charles, throws down the cigarette, stabs it out and says, you bastard, we've had your mum for 80 years. We're not going to cop you for 5 minutes, mate. I ask this quite sincerely. Is that fair to Prince Charles? If we are going to do this, if we are going to affirm our sovereignty and our right to our independence and our sovereignty, it need have nothing to do with the health or otherwise of a fine lady living in England or her son. Let us do this as grown-ups, look mum in the eye and say, Mum, we're leaving home, we'll be okay. But seriously, slipping out the back after the funeral? Really? I say that as a nation, we are better than that. And so that is, however, the primary problem. That a lot of people say, let's wait till the Queen dies. I say, ludicrous, we're better than that. And I like the line, and I'm not just saying it for the obvious, I love the line from Paul Keating, that he said last year. He said, a great nation does not wait for these things to fall into your lap. You reach up and you take it. You grab it. You're seen to grab it. You don't wait. So thank you for that question.
Oh, thanks very much, Peter, for a very entertaining talk. My name's Jim. I just wanted to... You mentioned that your approach is the politics of the possible. Mm-hmm. And frankly, despite the entertaining talk a moment ago, I still think the time to strike is when the Queen dies. I still think the possibility of Charles being head of state in Australia is unthinkable to so many people. So if you had a strategy, you would be building it on that basis.
So we wait for 15 years maybe? Seriously, do you think we should wait for 15 years?
No, I don't think we should wait for 15 years. I think we should be campaigning now. And the other thing is that there's a very interesting poll reported in the paper today that I think we do have to deal with the politics of the possible. The big discussion at the moment, there's no discussion about the Republic, unfortunately, in the public eye at the moment. There's a big discussion about Australia Day and Invasion Day, and going on the huge rallies that took place in Melbourne and Sydney and around the country, there's actually a bigger discussion in the public now about the question of Indigenous rights and Australia Day, and somehow I think we've got to link the two. And in fact, interestingly, Ken Wyatt, that I don't agree with on almost anything, did link up the question of changing the day with a treaty. And I think that we've actually realistically got a bigger possibility of establishing the Republic Day if we can link it up with a change to Australia Day. Australia Day should be Republic Day. And that's and I think I think we're talking about real politics here. We've got a bigger discussion in the public at the moment about change the date than we have about the Republic. 61% in the poll that was reported today said that they didn't care what day Australia Day was, as long as they got a public holiday and barbecue. Well, let's make it Republic Day. Let's make it Treaty Day. I think we've got a better chance if we link up the strong sentiment that's growing about a treaty with the Aboriginal people and with the change of the day and people say, well, what day? Okay, well, let's make it Republic Day.
I got it. Okay, thank you for the question. Tap, 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 tap. I broadly agree. I think that and on my remarks leading into that, I did a lot of interviews going into Australia Day. I said that the obvious solution to this is to have Independence Day, to have Australia Day on a day, because the point I made in my speech last week was that when you look at the way the Americans do their National Day and the French do their National Day, it's connected to a fabulous story. The French, they stormed the Bastille. The Americans, the rockets' red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. It's inspiring, and they all know it, and they all love it. At our Australia Day celebrations, nobody talks about, and then Governor Phillip, he got that Union Jack. He stormed ashore at Sydney Harbour and he planted the bastard. How about that? Nobody talks like that. Nobody is even, very few people, I'll bet in this room, and I'm not one of them, I couldn't. Can anybody here know what's the spot? What's the spot? We know the Museum of Contemporary Art, we know where the Opera House is. Does anybody know where that flag was actually put in? It's not something we revere. So at the moment, very few people link Australia Day to a particular event and are really, really proud of that event. And one of the people I was going back and forth with on Twitter, somebody said, I made that point on Twitter, and somebody said, I'm proud. I am really proud. I'm going to celebrate the first day that the First Fleet got to Australia. And I said, fantastic, mate. Big party at your house on the 18th of January, because that's when it happened. The 11 ships came through the heads of Botany Bay, and there they were. And for me, the point that I've made about change the date, I think there is a similarity to the same-sex marriage debate. My friend Ben Fordham, who does drive time on 2GB, when he started, he's made the point to me that when he started doing that in 2010, same-sex marriage was not a particularly big deal, but it's extraordinary for him how within 4 years it became a red-hot issue. Within 7 years, it had passed. Why did same-sex marriage pass? Not because the Australian people were, for me, hugely emotionally involved for decade after decade. It passed because the logic of the argument was so damn strong that once you stopped and paused and thought about it, most people that looked at it and said, well, there's no argument against it. It's such a strong argument to pass same-sex marriage, and in the age of social media, you could transform a population who got ever more passionate about it. So 62% passed it. And I think that similarly with the Republic, it's not that the wider population talks about it all the time, they don't. But the logic of the argument is so damn strong that in the age of social media, I mean, one of the things, for example, that a lot of people say against us becoming a republic, they say things like, no, I still want Australia to be a part of the Commonwealth Games. And they put that out as a serious thing. And at which point you point out very delicately that there are 54 nations in the Commonwealth of Nations, 37 of them are republics. And that's the sort of thing, before the age of social media, it'd be hard to get that message out. You'd have to door knock, you'd have to put leaflets, you'd have to write articles. In the age of social media, we have people putting out memes, putting out photos with the facts, knocking down myths. We can actually move this very quickly. In terms of hitching the wagon of the Australian Republic movement to save the date, I am not a professional politician, but my instinct is we have to proceed carefully. We are very reluctant to move from steering by one star, which is for us to be a republic, without adding all of these other policies that we necessarily have. However, I have made the point, and I agree with you, the energy of save the date and the people on the streets, we need absolutely to channel that energy into our movement. And that's why in my remarks in the public domain, I've said, you know, for change the date, I absolutely agree with it intellectually. It's not a visceral thing and the reason I don't feel it viscerally is because I'm not of a people that's been done down for the last 250 years. But the more I think about it as the years go by, the more passionate I get for the cause. And I suspect in 2 years' time, I'll be like I was for same-sex marriage, which is, of course we should be a bloody same-sex marriage. How on earth could you argue against it? And so it's something that it's going to warm up over the next 2 or 3 years. And that's the line that I put. We need that crowd to channel behind Republic Day, Independence Day, because that is the obvious solution. Thank you.
I'd like to switch for focus for a moment to other Commonwealth countries. So I have 3 questions around that. First of all, with countries such as Canada and New Zealand, is there currently a big push for a republic? And
why don't I take your questions one at a time, if I can?
Yeah, okay,
Yep.
sure.
Okay,
Yep.
so the first question, is there a big push? I think in Canada it's about 11 or 12%, which is curious because in 1965 they changed their flag. And it's a wonderfully revered flag. And so they were the first to make the actual break, you know, of the Commonwealth countries. I think they were one of the first to have a flag of their own. So you would think, particularly with somebody as clever as Justin Trudeau, you'd think that there would be a big push for the Republic, but it's not huge. In Great Britain, I've addressed I've talked to a big crowd over there of Brit Republicans. 17% of them are Republicans. And Jeremy Corbyn, is that his name? Corbyn? I love the fact that when he was admitted to the Privy Council, they said he had to bow to the Queen. And he said, well, I won't. I'm a Republican. I don't bow to the Queen. She's not elected. She's not representing the people. So I love that. I love that kind of stuff. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, again, I've done quite a few rants, and I did one rant in their Sunday Star Times 2 weeks ago. They asked me, and I wrote a piece for them, and I said, look, whether or not New Zealand should be a republic is none of my damn business. However, if you are asking me, and then I did my rant, of course they should be, and you'd love to think, I love Jacinda Ardern's approach. I mean, she got there from being fresh, different and new, and she has said publicly she is a Republican. I like their fellow John Key, and I really admired the fact that he put up the 6 candidates to be the new flag of New Zealand. Strangely, they didn't have the obvious one, the silver fern on the background. And for us on the matter of the flag, and I repeat, I don't say this as chair of the Republic movement, but the answer for us for the flag, for me, should be the Eureka flag. The Eureka flag has got well, there's a wonderful book out about the Eureka Stockade, and as a matter of fact, I wrote it. So, second question, go on.
Actually, I'll reduce it to 2 questions. So the second one is in terms of which country is likely to be the next one. Would you say it's one of the other Commonwealth countries that might get ahead of us, or do you think we might?
Nothing springs to mind. What have you got? Who do you think? Who will be the next? I'm hoping it'll be us, but who do you think?
That's why I was asking.
Well, nothing. No particular Commonwealth country springs to mind. Although, I love the fact. Well, it's fascinating that the Fijians were moving to having a flag of their own until their Fijian team won the Sevens and the Olympics, and they said, well, our Sevens boys won under that flag, and that's the flag we're going to stay with. So I thought that was a bit disappointing, but fascinating. So, no, I should inquire on that. What other country is close? Thank you for the 2 questions. Yes?
Are people elected head of state and Governor-General would probably be to say the fact that it wouldn't be under a monarchy and that basically my point is something like what happened to the Whitlam government being dismissed would be less likely to happen again if we didn't have a England-appointed Governor-General. What's your opinion on that?
Can you would you just rephrase? Just start again.
I'm sorry about that. I got a bit nervous.
No, that's absolutely fine, but I just need to understand. Go on, start again.
Basically, my point is that I think that with a people-elected Governor-General, that there may be less chance of something like the dismissal of the Whitlam government occurring again.
Okay. All right. That's a very interesting question. Yeah. Yes. I want to take that one on advisement and come back to you. I don't have a ready answer, and because the cameras are rolling, I don't want to say make a dickhead of myself, as my wife told me not to. But it's a very interesting question. I will inform myself and be more ready next time, and maybe I'll come back to you later. Go on.
Okay. My name is Chandran.
But just before you do start, Chandran, this is a room filled with expertise. Does anybody have an opinion on that question that maybe we can open the floor? The question is, if we have somebody there who's popularly elected, are we less likely to face a dismissal? Does anybody have a strong opinion that would like to answer the question? Yeah, go on. Well, tell us about Austria.
They've got a fascist as the president, elects president.
All right, go on.
Depends on the model. Very depends on the model.
Yeah.
Popularly elected.
Will it reduce a constitutional crisis? Will it reduce a constitutional crisis? Depends on the model.
But really, it was the model that caused.
That's a clever answer. You go,
That's a clever
Chandran.
answer. Okay. Now, my question is regarding the monarchist. Now, you must have met, spoken, debated many monarchists. Now, from that experience, can you tell us what is the real reason why they want to stick to the English monarchy?
Yeah.
Now, the reason what they say may be quite different. They might say, if it is not broken, don't fix it or something. Or is it something deep down, there is some sort of an insecurity in them that disconnecting from England makes the country less European? I sometimes felt that way speaking to monarchists.
That's very interesting.
I'm an immigrant, like the previous speaker.
Sure. No, that's a very interesting question. And in my book that I launched last night, I wrote the foreword for Benjamin T. Jones, which is a great book, by the way, about the history of the Republic. And he makes the point that republicanism wasn't invented last Tuesday in a Surrey Hills cafe, that it actually goes back to 1792 was the first time somebody was punished in this country for being a Republican. And you've got this strain of republicanism going through. But my point that I made in his foreword, the foreword to that book is, we are a seriously weird mob in this country. That we can have people, this is not sexist, but this is just truth. When the first ball of the Ashes campaign was bowled, I think on the 23rd of November last year, many males, and I was one of them, looked at the footage coming out, Channel 9, and there was, I think it was Mitchell Starc, puts his foot on the backboard of the fence at the Gabba and starts charging towards this little pommy batsman who got his bat up. And there's this visceral thing in a lot of Australian males which says, "Kill him! Take the pommy's head off!" And that same strain that is within the Australian character that says, kill the pommies on the cricket field, the people that are proud of that, and we beat the Poms in the rugby, and we beat them in this, and we beat them in that, and we're better than this, and our soldiers were better than theirs, etc. Many of the same people that are proud of all that still say, no, but we still need an English head. We've still got to have an English queen or an English king. We can't. I mean, and that's the really weird thing. The same thing that I make the point that in the Second World War, I mean, people say, put it as a binary thing that we can't. We can either. You can't worry about it becoming a republic until you've fixed the economy or until you've done this or you've done that, as if you can't do several things at a time. But we are a people in the Second World War when the Germans invaded Poland, and they ran riot all the way through Europe, and then they got to North Africa. And they knocked over army after army after army, got to North Africa, knocked over army after army after army, till they got to the Australians at Tobruk. The Australians were the first to stop the Germans. The Japanese, excuse me, Japanese, Pearl Harbor, same thing, into the Philippines, into Indochina, down through the Malaysian Peninsula, Singapore, knocked over army after army after army. They got to the Australians at Milne Bay and Kokoda, the Australians stopped them. And so on the Australian record is, in that Second World War, it wasn't Spielberg, it wasn't Saving Private Ryan, it wasn't Tom Hanks, it wasn't the Americans, it wasn't the Brits. The first to stop the Germans and the first to stop the Japanese were the Australians. And you're wondering where I'm going with this. And the answer is, as a people, we were strong enough to do that. But here in 2018, people say, oh, no, too hard, just too hard. We just can't muster the political will to become a republic. And so we're strong enough to do that. So I'm wondering, and the thing that I've learned after I find myself starting to ramble is to do what the Americans did in Vietnam, which is to declare victory and leave. And I'm not far off doing that. But to go back to Chandra's question, yes, I think the holding on to the monarchy is the last bastion of the cultural cringe. It's the idea that we're not strong enough, we can't do it on our own, and it's a fundamental view of who we are, identity politics, if you like. To a lot of Australians still have this thing that we are great, what our flag says we is. Our flag proclaims that we are Great Britain in the South Seas. And a lot of Australians still view themselves, I believe, as transplanted Brits. I don't. I am, you are, we are Australian. I feel 100% Australian. And it was interesting, there's that SBS show called, I think it was called Who Do You Think You Are?, where they do genetic testing to see where your people came from. And they asked me to submit some saliva or whatever it was, which I did, and the testing came back, and I thought our family has long wondered if we have some Indigenous blood in us. And so I was very interested to know if there was any Indigenous blood, and the answer came back, you're the purest white man that ever lived. That they said that when they didn't use the word pure, but the most, whatever the terminology is, but they said there was no trace in my genetics of anything other than the British Isles for the last 25,000 years, which is as may be, but I feel 100% Australian. And in fact, when I was playing rugby in France at one point, I was asked to play for the French team with only one condition put upon it, that I would have to take out French citizenship. And I made one phone call to the Australian Embassy and I said, what would happen if I got French citizenship? And they said, you'd have to hand in your Australian passport. And I said, no further questions. It was unthinkable to me because it wouldn't matter what passport I had, I'm an Australian. And so I didn't want to go down that path. But I'm rambling, but yes, the answer is I think it's the last bastion of the cultural cringe. Thank you. Go.
You must have been disappointed not to have any Aboriginal ancestry, Peter.
It would have been very interesting.
My name's Malcolm, and but I have to say that I've read many of your books, and
thank you.
as an advocate of Australian spirit, an Australian capacity to handle and tackle the hideous circumstances that they faced at Kokoda and Trabuc and Gallipoli and so on and so forth. There's clearly, I think, with respect to that point that you were just discussing, there was a muddle in the referendum over the model, and that didn't help insofar as a lot of people being unsure as to what sort of system we're going to adopt. That's only a point. What I really wanted to raise was something like Eureka, which is one of your stories, which was a story of a political revolution in Australia, and in much more difficult circumstances insofar as the demarcation between the British and the other people who came from all over the place. There was a spirit which changed things dramatically. How do we get this spirit? How do we invigorate the Australians like they were in those scenarios to get this thing working? Because we clearly got to get rid of the Queen. We certainly don't want to wait for 15 years. We know that Malcolm's going to sit around on his hands because he doesn't want to rock the boat or whatever. But we've really got to move this along. We've really got to grasp this scenario and get this spirit and get it moving.
All I can think of is doing what we're doing now, going door to door like the Irish did. They went from door to door to get the people on board for same-sex marriage. I'm speaking to every audience I can. Every time I go on media, I'm putting it. I work it into my columns. I absolutely take your point. A lot of people say that the great problem we face is the popularity of the young royals, and Will and Kate and all that, to which I have a very strong answer to that. Look, at some point in the next 15 years, young Prince George will go out on his first date. They'll put it on the front page of the Women's Weekly, and there'll be a big man in a red bandana at the front of the queue, elbowing everybody out of the way to read it first, because I love that shit. It goes on and on and on. And my point is that people do love all of that royal carry-on. And I do too. I love that stuff. And it will go on when we become a republic. It will make no difference at all. And it's an important point to make that all of those who love royalty and working out what the Duchess is wearing and the kind of shoes, and I always say things like the Today Show. I believe Harry farted at a fete. Did Harry fart at a fete? We're going to cross live. Yes, Harry farted at a fete. And, there are people that love that stuff. I don't actually love it that much, but it will all go on. But how do we engage the broad mass to get the broad masses of Australia to have the passion that they do have for Save the Date? That is not yet obvious to me. I don't know. Do you have ideas?
Well, I just think that the Royals don't really add much value. I mean, certainly, what do they really do? I mean, what do they do for us? I mean, what do they do for this country? We all know that the Westminster model is quite secure insofar as the political model is concerned, and that's why it works, and that's why the institution has been preserved. And people are nervous of changing that institution because they're not going to sure what they're going to end up with. The presidential system, is that better? And that's one issue. But I don't really think, apart from the sort of the glossy magazines and the social media and God knows what that goes with the Royals, they don't add any value. They don't do anything in particular.
Well, the point is, I'll just say that the point has been made. A lot of people say, if you listen to Talkback, which for my sins I sometimes do, a lot of people say, what will the Republic do for the economy? That they see everything through the prism of the economy. And you get these Talkback announcers, no names, no pack drills, let's just call him Alan Jones, who say things like, will this give us one job? One job. And it's like, well, actually, yes, it will help the economy, but the primary reason we're doing it is not for the economy. But I do make the point that we are in a strong trade competition with Great Britain for the attention of China. And recently, the Queen of England our head of state received a Chinese trade delegation at Buckingham Palace. Now, how many people here think that when the Queen of England, our head of state, actually the Queen of Australia too, received the Chinese trade delegation, how many people think she was pumping up the tyres of Australian trade, or how many people think she was pumping up the tyres of British trade? Of course she was pumping up the tyres of British trade. Is it too much? And so in Benjamin T. Jones, that made this book last night, that launched this book last night, he made a very interesting speech. And one of the things he said about when we were formed as a nation in 1901, all of the symbolism was part to say Australia is part of the British Empire. We sang God Save the Queen, or God Save the King, as it was in 1901, whichever it was, somebody here will know. Was Queen Victoria still on the throne in 1901?
I think it was a king.
King. We sang God Save the Queen. We had the British flag in the top left-hand corner. The part of the Constitution was, I think, where Australia was referred to, of the Queen and all her territories. It was small. It was, you are a homogenous part of the British Empire, which was fine in 1901 because that's who we were. But as we move into the 21st century and we get bigger and more independent and stronger, though all of that symbolism no longer fits for who we are now. Go on.
I mean, you know, you point out in your books, Turbulent and so on, and how the British just used us basically to create an armed force to protect them, Gallipoli in particular, to protect their own interests.
Until Singapore, when Singapore fell, and we
they didn't give a shit about us.
Churchill said, "Save Great Britain first."
And even wouldn't help us. Sending troops to help us in places like Kokoda and places, couldn't care less. And here we have this cultural cringe about the British. I don't get it. My ancestry is British. I'm an immigrant as well. My parents are British. And someone said to me one time, which passport would you choose? Same thing. British passport in the bin. We didn't think about it for 1 second. But the reality of it is that they really don't do anything for us. I mean, other than give us a political framework which we feel secure in. Now, we just need to replace that framework. Now, I don't believe that the population of Australia now, the demographic in Australia, really, because it's changed so much in the last 30 years, really understands the significance or otherwise of the Commonwealth. We've got a different audience. We don't have a pure Australian audience that can demarcate simply between, you know, the monarchy being symbolic and all this sort of bloody nonsense. These people don't really understand. They don't understand why we have a queen. They don't get it. I don't think it's too hard to mobilise the modern Australian population, the modern immigrant, the Chinese and
I'll say this, that Bill Shorten on the 29th of July last year made a commitment, again, to 950 Republicans in Melbourne. He said, and the cameras were rolling, he said if his government is elected, the question will be put to the Australian people, do you think Australia should have an Australian as our head of state? Now, we are absolutely non-partisan, and we don't say vote Labor at all. What we have done is to call on the Prime Minister to match that commitment, but I do think I can say it's a terrific commitment. And so, you know, if Labor does win, and we don't hope that Labor wins and we don't hope the Liberals win, we are non-partisan. But if they win, that question will be put in the next term, which is something that's exciting. So,
one point.
Go on.
ARM needs to send a delegation to get into Malcolm Turnbull, get off his arse and do something. Number one. Number two, thank you for all your work. I love it.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, how you going? My name's Jay Williams, and look, I'd like to start, I guess. Sorry, my name's Jay. Yeah, sorry, my name's Jay Williams, and I'd like to start by congratulating everyone to come along tonight and engage in this really important discussion. I think the second thing is to thank the Gaelic Club, but most importantly, thanks to Pete. I mean, his amazing work, inspirational work, not only as a footballer, but as an author and a commentator, but as a founding father and a poet of the Republic, which will happen at some stage, I'm sure. So
All right, well, thank you very much.
join me in that. After that little pat on the back, I'm more interested in the model, the eventual model that might come about. And I guess I'm highly persuaded by a democratically elected head of state what is one of ours.
So what model do you see? What would you like for the direct election?
Well, I like the two-step stage of asking the Australian people, do we want a republic?
Yeah.
And then when should we do it and how should we go about it? But I like the South African model where they went around and they had a constitutional assembly, they had democratically elected assemblies to talk about what sort of model we should have. I like the directly elected model. I like the idea of a new constitution. I don't like the quick fix by Truffles Turnbull in the 99 convention. I think it was a con. But if we could get a new constitution where we have a directly elected head of state, a charter of human rights, a declaration of independence.
Yeah, okay. But do you think, to return to my point, do you agree that it's in the art of the possible, it will be very difficult to say to the Australian people, we are changing the entire system, other than, or the minimalist model to say, Everything you know and familiar with stays. We're just not asking an unelected lady in England.
It's a very good point, a very good question. And I note on the last occasion, the CONCON 99 Constitutional Convention, just before that, the directly elected head of state model was around 64%. The moment that got killed off and we went to the parliamentary model, it fell right below. And that was Howard's strategy. That was Howard's strategy to divide, to kill it off. And I think that a movement, I've read a lot of your work and I'm inspired by it, but if it's going to be that passion, that moment when we have an Independence Day, it has to come from within. And it's not going to be a quick fix model by politicians. It has to be over a 2-year period, and we involve the community in that. But some of the principles which I like you, this is more of a comment, but now I'll get to the questions. So a directly elected head of state, not a politician elected head of state. That's rubbish. Come on. We don't want politicians electing our head of state.
But if you go to, when you say you don't want a politician's republic, from the moment somebody puts their hand up and says, vote for me, I'm 6'3", that person is going to be a politician.
Well, no, but for the same, well, perhaps not, Pete, but we'd hope...
It has to be,
no,
but ipso facto.
But what would hope, Pete, in that, and I understand that critique, but you imagine the day, and we talk about Australian nationalism, and I talk about that in the peaceful sense and not in any other revolutionary independence movement sense, but imagine the moment that you have the first democratic election of our head of state and the Australian people come together and we unite, we reconcile, we become an independent state. For that first time, we elect our head of state who's accountable to us, I think it's a hybrid model, accountable to us and the parliament. But the moment it becomes a parliamentary elected model...
But that's what it is right now, and that's what a lot of people are comfortable with. And
that's why we need to move.
Okay,
Pete.
but if you look to, for me, one of our finest Governor-Generals in the last 2 or 3 decades that stands out for me was Sir William Dean. Okay, so Sir William Dean, famous jurist, great person. I remember... I was particularly impressed when we had that tragedy in the Swiss Canyon. Remember, we lost 18 hikers, I think they were, or canoeists. And William Dean, Sir William, within 3 hours, was on a plane to Switzerland, representing the people, accompanied the bodies back, and was magnificent. He was
Do you want a ceremonial head of state?
Sorry?
Do you want a ceremonial head of state? Could you imagine the United States?
But just let me finish.
Well,
Sir
yes,
William Dean, put him up for an election, you just wouldn't get close. You wouldn't get close to a Sir William Dean. And to a certain extent, I love that line from Groucho Marx, where he said, I would never want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. And to a certain extent, I'm less fussed about having a governor or a president that wants to be the president. I'd much rather wear like, for example, Dame Marie Bashir, okay? For me, in terms of recent governors, she was just fantastic. Everybody loved her. It never occurred to her in a month of Sundays that she was ever going to be the governor. She was put in that position. She performed magnificently. And to a certain extent, the decorum of being a president, that sort of above it all, loses something when you say, vote for me, I want to be the president. Whereas the role that we're used to are people that are just, they've made their mark in other fields. Somebody who is the Prime Minister, we all understand the system that we want political power to stay with the actual parliamentary executive rather than have the possibility, if we have direct election, whereby you're the Prime Minister and you say we're going to go... No, hang on, let's just say you're the Prime Minister and you say we're going to go left. Bruce is our popularly elected president and he says we're going to go right. Can you not see the problem that you're setting up a system whereby, a la the French, you can have a president and a prime minister that are going against each other, both claiming a popular mandate?
I mean, I don't mean to challenge you directly.
No, not at all.
But in terms, it surprises me because you have this revolutionary fervour, you have this independence, but you want a ceremonial head of state. Could you imagine the United States of America having a ceremonial head of state?
If only.
Could you imagine? And the problem that your model, which the critique of my model is, not my model, but the direct elected model, is that the ceremonial model could potentially set up the same conflict. And that's from a personal perspective, I want my head of state to be elected by us accountable to us, and I don't want to use the old.
And then you and I, to finish this, because we've got two other people.
Certainly.
But you and I need to have a pact, and this is what I propose. You and I and the people that follow what we both think, who agree with us, going into this next referendum, we need to come to an agreement. We're going to go at each other, hammer and tongs. We're going to have a robust debate. But I promise you this, if your mob who want direct election get up, I will throw my full support behind that. And what we need this time is for you to say the same. And your mob, trust Australian democracy. Trust the wisdom of the people. And we all agree that we're going to have a robust civil debate, but at the end of it, nobody gets to take their bat and ball and go home like happened last time and say my way or the highway going into 99. I love Ted Mack, but I think it was Ted Mack's line where he said, "Oh, don't worry," and Phil Cleary, we won't get it up this time. It'll be back in 18 months. Well, we're now 18 years, and the rest. I think we've got to move on. But thank you for the
Certainly,
question.
Peter. Thanks, everybody.
Okay, thank you. I think we're losing the mob. Let's have the last two questions and all go home.
I think we need to be very cautious about that line, maybe for a future time, but certainly that's what split the movement the first time round, and I think we need to be very careful we don't let that in again. Peter, I want to thank you for an absolutely stunning articulation of the issues and funny and witty. But so the point I want to make is actually quite a small point. It's to do with strategy for growing the movement. And I've been thinking about this for a few weeks. Just before Christmas, I rang the ABC Wendy Harmer, folks phone in the morning sort of with their issues program, and said, listen, please, can we have a phone in about this ridiculous citizenship issue that's going on, and the fact that, if you've got a father who was born in Britain, you're not eligible to be standing in the Australian Parliament where the effing head of state of Australia is a British citizen. So I'm wondering if we can actually use this point, if we can, the movement...
Harness the dual citizenship.
Can use the movement, can grow the movement on the back of this citizenship debate, and we can aggressively get into the media and point out to the Australian public the absurdity of throwing people out of our parliament because they happen to have a relative who's British, whereas the titular head of state of Australia is a British citizen.
And the answer is that's happening organically. From the moment dual citizenship started, our membership started, when I first took over, everybody on the membership roll I knew personally. Because I was twisting arms and doing, bringing in anybody I could, anybody owed me a favour, blah, blah, blah. The wonderful thing is just in the last year, it's growing organically. So, and the dual citizenship saw a surge in that because people looked at it and just saw the absurdity of it. But so thank you for that question. Last question, here we go.
Right, I've got my oil plates on with this, but I'm going to try it. Okay. I've got my L plates on, so just be kind to me on this one. But I was reading recently about the penal colony and saying one of the differences between Britain and Australia was that the penal colony focused on very centralised systems of power. And one of the things I find interesting about the Republic is it's far more democratic. What I see day to day in my own municipality, the inner West Council, the forced mergers of large councils, is the antithesis of democracy. It's centralisation. Now, how do we go from that mindset of being still extremely centralised and very poor, small n nationalism? How do we go from that to a kind of democratic ethos that I think really underscores...
It sounds to me like you've thought about this issue a lot more than I have. You raise a very interesting point that's never been put to me before, so I'm all ears. What's your view?
My view is our structures have to come down. They have to fail. Turnbull has to fail. Labor Party has to fail. Things have to get a lot worse in Australia.
That sounds like the infamous line, we have to destroy the village to save it. And I don't think that's a way forward for us.
We have to come to a point where we say these institutions are failing us. We have to decentralise. This trajectory we're on is no longer working, and I don't know how we do that.
I'm going to wrap it up there. Thank you for the question. I don't have a clever answer, but thank you all for your attention. And can I just repeat, your goodwill's not enough. Google us, join us. We march. Let's go. Thank you.
Thank you.